anger from the near 40,000 Australian citizens who remain stranded abroad. Well, I'm joined now by Kate and Dave Jeffries, who have finally managed to make it home to Australia after a long 10 months in Canada. Thanks so much for coming on the programme, both.
Good morning, Lewis.
Morning. Right, Kate, should we start with you then? And just to explain for people around the world who won't have been following what's been happening with Australia, why couldn't you get home?
Unfortunately, it's a direct result of government policy, which has placed flight caps on the amount of people allowed to enter the country. Unfortunately, our federal government hasn't taken control of borders and quarantine, and there's limited quarantine spaces in Australia, which means that there's a limited amount of Australians that can make it home.
I see. And so, Dave, how did you eventually get home? What did it take?
Look, it's we had return tickets booked. We landed in February February last year. We were supposed to return late March. We had six. We eventually got home on our sixth attempt after having the devastation of having 5 flights cancelled and living with the uncertainty for 10 months. So we've just been home for 2 weeks after a trip that we left for almost a year ago.
That is a long time, and that must have caused a strain.
It was living with the uncertainty of just, you always had a plane ticket to come home, but you were never sure whether you were going to be on that plane or not. And the absolute devastation of just being told that, no, you're not going home this month, and you're probably not going to get home for the next 2 months. It was really heartbreaking to have to go through that for that long.
And of course, Kate, along with that, financial costs as well.
Yes, financial costs certainly added up, setting up another life overseas for 10 months. We were very fortunate that Dave was able to work remotely with his company in Australia. There's many Australians stranded overseas right now who are actually living in homeless shelters, who have been trapped for nearly a year and have gone through all of their savings and in dire circumstances and still unable to return to Australia.
And that's really tough. And what would you like the government to do, Dave?
Look, I think, this is sort of in relation to the Australian tennis players coming in, and I think that this is, really it is an embarrassment, or should be an embarrassment on the government, that after 10 months we're still having to decide between Australian or non-Australian tennis players coming in versus taking the places that stranded Australians that should be getting. I think many are very happy that the tennis is going ahead in Australia, but the fact that they are being let in ahead of Australians that have been trying desperately to come home. 8,000 are considered on the vulnerable list, and yet we are welcoming thousands of foreign tennis players in. It really just is a terrible. It should be a terrible indictment on this government, and that they really just need to look around to international neighbours, even to New Zealand, who has a queue system whereby those that are really struggling to get home can.
And Kate, what would you like to see happen following that New Zealand example? I'm sure the government, I think, did lay on flights for some people to get home. What else would you like to see?
We just need our Prime Minister to stop shirking his responsibilities over to the states and take a federal approach. I mean, they've found a political will to allow these tennis players in. They've found places for them to quarantine, and yet they refuse to find the political will to return Australian tax-paying citizens. And that's 10 months, 11 months into that. It's just unacceptable. And they're also issuing so many mistruths out there that Australians have had plenty of time to come home. We left for a month. Our flight was cancelled. We had 5 other flights cancelled. It's not an issue of time. If you don't have flights to get home, you simply can't get home. And it's very disappointing as an Australian to also see the sentiment from the Australian public that there's been a lot of fear spread through the community via politicians, and really 1% of returning Australians testing positive to COVID. They're going into quarantine, and we just need to come up with a workable federal approach to get more Australians home. They need to be prioritised.
I see. Well, thank you very much for raising the issue and coming on and talking to us about it, and we're very pleased that you did eventually both make it home. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that.